I stood in the centre of the Grand Hall of Stockholm, wearing a navy dress that cost more than my childhood home, holding a Nobel Prize in literature. The Swedish King smiled as he shook my hand. Flashbulbs exploded like starlight. 2,000 people applauded. And somewhere in that sea of faces, my family sat frozen. Because the name called to this stage was not Emily Whitmore. It was Adrienne Vale, the pen name I'd used for 8 years, the identity behind 12 internationally acclaimed novels, 3 of which had become required reading at universities across 46 countries. The woman the New York Times called the most important literary voice of our generation. My family thought that woman was someone else entirely, someone brilliant and unknowable, someone who couldn't possibly be the disappointment they'd raised. I didn't correct them. I let them believe. And tonight, I was about to tell the world the truth. But first, let me take you back. Back to when I was nobody. Back to when my own blood treated me like I was nothing. My father was Professor Michael Whitmore, Distinguished Chair of Philosophy at Cambridge University. My mother, Dr. Victoria Whitmore, was a renowned surgeon whose papers on cardiac innovation had saved thousands of lives. My older sister Catherine had graduated summa cum laude from Oxford at 21, spoke 6 languages, and now led policy reform at the United Nations. And then there was me. I was the one who supposedly struggled with simple arithmetic, the one who took 3 attempts to pass basic chemistry, the one whose standardized test scores hovered just above average, the family embarrassment wrapped in well-bred smiles and quiet sighs. Emily, darling, perhaps university isn't for everyone, my mother said when I was 17, her voice clinical as a diagnosis. Some people are meant for other paths. Other paths. She meant lesser paths. Simpler lives. Catherine had already been accepted to Harvard's doctoral program in international law. Our parents hosted a garden party with champagne and self-congratulation. I helped serve the canapes. A guest mistook me for hired staff. No one corrected her. That night, I overheard my father in his study. "The girl has no intellectual capacity," he told someone on the phone. Probably another professor, another member of his intellectual circle. Good-natured, yes, pleasant enough, but dim. We've tried tutors, special programs, behavioural specialists. Nothing takes. Victoria and I have accepted it. At least Catherine inherited our genes properly. Dim. The word sat in my chest like a stone. I was 18 years old and my own father believed I was stupid. Here's what he didn't know. I wasn't struggling because I lacked intelligence. I was drowning because I learned differently. My mind didn't process information in straight lines. It moved in spirals, in connections, in patterns that standardized education couldn't measure. Math. Problems made no sense when presented as naked numbers. But give me a story wrapped around those numbers, a narrative, a human reason, and I could solve anything. Give me an equation about projectile motion, and I'd stare blankly. Tell me that equation described a girl throwing stones at her oppressor's window, and I could calculate trajectory, velocity, and impact with perfect accuracy. Literature was where I lived, history, philosophy, the architecture of language. These were the places my mind opened like a flower towards sun. But my family measured intelligence in scientific formulas and quantifiable results. In their world, loving books was a pleasant hobby, not a legitimate intellect. So I hid. I hid how much I read. I hid the essays I wrote late at night, exploring existential philosophy through the lens of forgotten medieval poets. I hid the short stories I crafted, weaving complex narratives that examined human psychology through metaphor. I let them think I was simple. I let them underestimate me. because I was already planning something they would never see coming. I was already building an escape route they couldn't imagine. The worst part wasn't the dismissal. The worst part was watching them celebrate Catherine's achievements while treating mine like participation trophies for a challenged child. When I won a regional essay competition at 16, beating 300 other students, my mother patted my head and said, "How nice, dear." When Catherine placed third in a debate tournament, they threw a dinner party. When my English teacher told them I had exceptional analytical abilities and a rare gift for language, my father smiled indulgently and said, "She tries very hard. We appreciate your encouragement." Tries very hard. As if effort, not ability, was my only asset. My teacher, Mrs. Brennan, pulled me aside after that parent conference. "Emily, your parents don't see you clearly. Don't let their blindness become your mirror." I was 17. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I remembered the words. When I turned 19, I told my family I was taking a gap year to find myself. Code, in their minds, for failure to launch. My mother's expression was pure resignation. My father simply nodded, already mentally writing me out of family accomplishments. Catherine hugged me with genuine pity. "It's okay to not be special, Emily," she whispered. "Most people aren't. There's dignity in ordinariness." Dignity in ordinariness, as if I should be grateful for mediocrity. I moved to a tiny apartment in Edinburgh, Scotland. Told my family I was working at a bookshop, which was true. What I didn't tell them was that I spent every moment I wasn't shelving books doing something else entirely. I was writing my first novel. Not just writing, building, researching, crafting with the precision my mother used in surgery. The systematic rigour my father applied to philosophy. I read 50 books on narrative, structure. I studied the masters, Woolf, Morrison, Marquez, Tolstoy, Atwood, Baldwin. I dissected their sentences like my mother dissected hearts, learning the pulse of language, the rhythm of story, the architecture of meaning. I wrote for 16 hours a day. My fingers cramped, my eyes burned. I lived on tea and toast and cheap pasta, but my mind had never been more alive, never more certain. The novel was about a girl erased by her family's expectations, who discovers an ancient library that exists between moments of time. Part magical realism, part psychological exploration, part love letter to the forgotten and the invisible. I poured everything into it, every wound, every silent observation, every year of being dismissed and overlooked. I called it The Space Between Mirrors, and I submitted it to publishers under a different name, Adrienne Vale. I chose a pen name for practical reasons initially. I didn't want my family's academic connections influencing anyone's judgment. I didn't want publishers seeing Whitmore and making assumptions, positive or negative. I wanted the work to stand alone, stripped of context and pedigree, but deeper than that, I needed to become someone else to tell the truth. Emily Whitmore was the disappointing daughter, the family burden, the girl who tried very hard but would never be brilliant. Adrienne Vale was the writer I actually was, sharp, observant, uncompromising. 7 publishers rejected the manuscript. The 8th, a small independent press in London, sent a different kind of letter. "This is extraordinary," the editor wrote. "Raw, ambitious, unlike anything I've read in years. Your prose is fearless. Your understanding of human psychology is sophisticated beyond measure. We want to publish this. We believe in it. We believe in you." I read that letter 17 times, sitting on the floor of my apartment, and I cried for an hour. Not sad tears, release. Someone saw me, someone understood, someone believed I was brilliant. The book launched quietly. A small print run, modest marketing, the kind of debut that usually disappears without notice, Except it didn't disappear. Readers found it. Book clubs devoured it. Bloggers wrote passionate analyses. A popular podcast dedicated an entire episode to discussing its themes. Within 3 months, it was being taught in a contemporary literature course at Edinburgh University. Within 6 months, a major publisher bought the rights and re-released it with international distribution. Within a year, The Space Between Mirrors had sold 800,000 copies and been translated into 23 languages. Adrienne Vale became a name people whispered with reverence. Critics called the novel a masterwork of modern fiction. The Guardian said it was the most important debut of the decade. Universities added it to syllabi. Literary magazines begged for interviews. I gave none. Adrienne Vale remained a mystery. No photos, no public appearances, no biographical details beyond lives in the UK. The anonymity was intentional. I wanted the work to speak. I wanted readers to engage with the ideas, not the identity. And selfishly, I wanted to watch my family's reaction without them knowing. I wanted to see what they'd say about me when they didn't know it was me. I visited home for Christmas that year, just after the book's explosive success. Catherine was reading it at the breakfast table. "Have you heard of this Adrienne Vale?" she asked, not looking up. "Everyone's talking about her novel. It's supposed to be genius. Pure genius." My mother glanced at the cover dismissively. "I don't read fiction. No practical application." My father was more interested. "Vale? Interesting surname. Wonder if she's related to the Cambridge Vales. Excellent academic lineage, that family." "There's no information about her," Catherine continued. "It's this whole mystery around her identity. No one knows who she is. Some people think she might be a famous author writing under a pseudonym, or maybe a professor avoiding academic scandal, or possibly someone with royal connections who can't publish openly. Probably a middle-aged woman with nothing better to do," my mother said, buttering her toast. "Bored housewife living out fantasies." I sipped my tea and said nothing. Catherine kept reading, occasionally murmuring appreciation. "God, this is beautiful. Listen to this line. They measured her silence and called it emptiness, never realizing it was simply a language they hadn't learned to speak." My father looked up. "That is rather good. Philosophically sound." "The whole book is like this," Catherine said. "It's about a girl whose family thinks she's ordinary, but she's actually extraordinary. They just can't see it because they're looking with the wrong eyes." The irony was so sharp I almost laughed, almost told them right then. But I held back, because this was more powerful than any confrontation could be. This was justice through irony. They would praise Adrienne Vale while dismissing Emily Whitmore, never understanding they were the same person, never realizing they were celebrating the daughter they'd pitied for years. So I continued. I wrote more books, got better with each one, sharper, deeper, more fearless. My second novel explored inherited trauma through 3 generations of women in post-war Vienna. My third examined identity and diaspora through a family of Iranian immigrants in northern England. My fourth was an experimental narrative about consciousness, told through 7 interconnected novellas, each in a different style. My fifth book was the riskiest, a meta-fictional exploration of a woman writing herself into existence, blurring the lines between author, narrator, and character. Critics called it audacious and revolutionary. Each book was different. Each pushed boundaries. Each sold millions. Adrienne Vale won the Booker Prize for my third novel. Then the National Book Award for my fifth. Then the Prix Goncourt. Literary festivals begged me to appear. Universities offered honorary doctorates to a person they'd never met. I declined everything. The mystery deepened. The legend grew. The Guardian listed me among the top 10 most influential writers alive. Time magazine called me the voice of a generation. My books were taught in high schools and graduate seminars, analysed in dissertations, discussed on morning television shows, and my family discussed each achievement at dinner completely unaware. "This Vale woman is remarkable," my father said during one visit 3 years into my secret success. "Her understanding of philosophical concepts is sophisticated. I've used excerpts from her third novel in my seminars. The students are fascinated." My father, who thought I was intellectually deficient, was teaching my work to his graduate students at Cambridge. "I've read everything she's written," Catherine admitted. "Every single book, some of them twice. There's something about her voice. It's feminine, but not soft, educated, but not pretentious. She writes like she's been underestimated her entire life and refused to shrink." I almost laughed, almost revealed everything right then. "She's probably incredibly confident," my mother added, finally showing some interest. "You can tell from the writing. Someone who's never doubted herself. Someone who always knew she was brilliant." If only they knew. If only they understood that every word came from years of their doubt, their dismissal, their absolute certainty that I would never amount to anything significant. "I wonder if we'll ever learn who she is," Catherine mused. "I'd love to meet her, ask her questions about her process, her inspiration." "You'd probably be disappointed," my father said. "Mystery is always more appealing than reality." I smiled into my teacup. Let them wonder. I lived 2 lives. Emily Whitmore, the quiet, unremarkable daughter who worked at bookshops and seemed to drift through life without ambition or direction. Adrienne Vale, the literary giant whose every book reshaped contemporary fiction, whose influence extended across continents. I kept my apartment small and modest, dressed simply in jeans and sweaters, avoided drawing attention to myself in any way. When my family asked what I was doing with my life, I shrugged and said I was writing a bit and getting by on bookshop wages. They nodded with familiar pity and quickly changed the subject to Catherine's latest achievement, or my father's newest publication. Meanwhile, my 8th novel spent 14 weeks at number 1 on the bestseller list. My film rights had sold for 7 figures. I'd earned enough money to buy my childhood home 3 times over and still have millions in investments. I kept it all secret. Built wealth quietly, invested carefully, lived modestly. I wasn't hiding from shame. I was waiting for the right moment. The perfect moment. The moment when the truth would mean something. The moment when the revelation would be complete. I won't pretend those years were easy, even with success. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I was being petty, if this elaborate secret was just revenge in disguise, if I should simply tell my family and move forward. But then I'd remember my father's voice. "The girl has no intellectual capacity?" I'd remember my mother's clinical dismissal. "Perhaps university isn't for everyone." I'd remember Catherine's pitying hug. "It's okay to not be special." And I'd remember why I was doing this. Not for revenge. Revenge would have been shallow and temporary. I was doing this to prove something to myself. To prove that I could build an entire identity, an entire career, an entire life that was completely and utterly mine. No family connections, no academic pedigree opening doors, no famous last name giving me credibility, just my words, my mind, my work. I needed to know I could succeed on my own terms, in my own way, with my own voice. And I had, spectacularly. By my 30th birthday, I'd published 9 novels, sold over 20 million copies worldwide, been translated into 67 languages, won prizes on 4 continents, inspired a generation of readers and writers, changed the literary landscape in ways that would outlast my lifetime. All while my family thought I was a pleasant failure working in bookshops. The cognitive dissonance must have been staggering for them later. But in those years, they simply didn't connect the dots. Why would they? Adrienne Vale was brilliant, sophisticated, worldly. Emily Whitmore was simple, directionless, ordinary. They couldn't imagine those two people were the same. They couldn't imagine I'd been extraordinary all along. The call came in late spring, just after my 32nd birthday. The Swedish Academy, the Nobel Prize in Literature, for narrative, innovation, and psychological depth that illuminates the human condition with unprecedented clarity. I was the youngest woman ever selected, only the 4th novelist in 20 years to receive the honour, the literary achievement of a lifetime. And they wanted Adrienne Vale to accept it in person, in Stockholm, in front of the world. No more hiding, no more anonymity. The prize came with mandatory public appearance, a speech, a ceremony broadcasted internationally, full revelation. I had 3 months to decide what to do. I could decline, stay mysterious, protect the secret. But that felt like cowardice, like I was still letting my family's judgment define me, like I was still hiding. Or I could accept, attend, and reveal that Emily Whitmore, the disappointing daughter, the academic failure, the girl with no intellectual capacity, was actually Adrienne Vale. The choice was obvious, but it still took me 2 weeks to make it. I accepted the prize, and I decided to tell my family first, before the world found out. I called them and said I wanted everyone together for an important announcement. My mother assumed I was finally getting married, probably to someone equally ordinary, she likely thought. Catherine thought perhaps I'd been accepted to some community college program. My father sounded weary, expecting more mediocrity to politely acknowledge. "Of course, darling," my mother said with forced enthusiasm. "We'll make time. How's next Sunday?" They gathered in the drawing room of our family home in Cambridge, the same room where they'd celebrated Catherine's achievements for years, the same room where they'd hosted the garden party for her Harvard acceptance while I served canapés, the same room where I'd always felt invisible. I stood before them, hand steady, heart calm. I'd practiced this moment in my mind for years. Now it was here. "I have news," I said. "I've won an award for writing." My father's smile was patronising. "That's wonderful, Emily. A local writing contest? That's lovely." "Not exactly," I said, letting the pause stretch. "The Nobel Prize in Literature." Silence. Complete, absolute, suffocating silence. Catherine laughed uncertainly. Emily, that's not funny." "I'm not joking," I said calmly. "I'm Adrienne Vale. I've been Adrienne Vale for 8 years. Every novel, every award, every achievement you've discussed at this table, that was me. All of it. Every word." My mother's face went pale, her surgeon's composure completely shattered. My father stood up, then sat back down heavily, like his legs had stopped working. Catherine stared at me, like I was speaking a foreign language, her mouth opening and closing without sound. "That's impossible," my father finally said, his voice hoarse. You barely passed school. You have no advanced degree. You struggled with basic coursework. "I learned differently than your system measured," I interrupted, my voice level and calm. "I thought in narratives, not numbers. In connections, not categories. In stories, not formulas. You called it stupidity. I called it a different kind of intelligence. And I was right." I pulled out my phone and showed them the official Nobel Committee email. Showed them the contracts with my publisher, all signed Adrienne Vale, Legal name Emily Whitmore. Showed them bank statements, royalty reports, years of evidence they'd never thought to look for. Because why would they? I was just dim little Emily. Just the family disappointment. Just the girl who would never amount to anything. My father's hands trembled as he read the documents. He kept looking up at me, then back at the papers, as if reality was refusing to solidify. My mother sat frozen, her perfectly composed face cracking into something raw and shocked. Catherine looked at me like she'd never seen me before. And in a way, she hadn't. All those years, Catherine whispered. All those times I felt sorry for you. All those times I thought... You thought... I needed your pity, I said quietly. I didn't. I needed you to see me. Really see me. But you couldn't because you'd already decided who I was. You wrote my story without asking me what I wanted to say. Emily, we didn't know, my mother started, her clinical voice wavering. If we had known... You didn't ask, I said, not unkindly but firmly. You measured me against a system I didn't fit and concluded I was broken. You never considered that the system might be broken instead. You never thought that maybe, just maybe, I was brilliant in ways you couldn't recognise. My father looked up, and for the first time in my life, I saw something new in his eyes. Not disappointment, not pity, something like awe and shame, deep, aching shame. The work you've done, he said hoarsely. Emily, it's extraordinary. I've taught your novels for 3 years. I've written papers analysing your themes. I called Adrienne Vale, the most important philosophical voice in contemporary literature. I presented at a conference last year about your 4th novel. I know, I said. I was sent the recording. I watched it. The implications crashed over them in waves. Every dismissive comment, every pitying glance, every conversation where they'd praised Adrienne Vale while treating Emily Whitmore like a pleasant burden to be managed. Every dinner where they discussed my brilliance while sitting across from me, never making the connection. Why didn't you tell us? Catherine asked, tears starting to form. Why did you let us think? Why did you let us be so wrong? Would you have believed me? I countered. If I'd come to you 5 years ago and said I was a successful novelist, would you have taken me seriously? Or would you have thought I was delusional, fantasizing? Would you have patted my head and told me it was nice to have dreams? None of them answered. They knew the truth. They would never have believed me. I needed to do this alone, I continued. I needed to prove to myself that I was capable without your validation or your connections. I needed to succeed as myself, not as Professor Whitmore's daughter or Dr. Whitmore's child. I needed to know that my mind, my voice, my vision was enough. My mother was crying silently now, mascara streaking her perfect composure. We failed you. God, Emily, we failed you so completely. You did, I said simply. No anger, just fact. But I didn't fail myself, and that's what matters. The next hour was difficult. My family cycled through shock, denial, grief, and guilt. My father kept apologising, his distinguished academic composure completely destroyed. My mother sat with her head in her hands. Catherine cried openly, repeatedly saying she was sorry, that she should have known, that she should have seen. But their reactions, while genuine, felt distant to me, like watching something through glass. Because I'd already processed this. I'd already worked through the pain of their dismissal. I'd already grieved the family that couldn't see me and built a life beyond their limited vision. Their awakening was happening years after mine. The Nobel ceremony is in 3 weeks, I finally said. You can attend if you want, but I need you to understand something first. They looked up at me, waiting. "I'm not doing this for you," I said clearly. "I'm not accepting this prize to make you proud or to prove you wrong or to earn your belated approval. I'm accepting it because I earned it, because my work matters, because I spent 8 years building something real and true and mine. This is my achievement, my moment, not yours." My father nodded slowly. "We understand." "Do you?" I pressed, but because I need to know that if you come to Stockholm, you're coming to witness my success, not to claim any part of it. You don't get to be proud in a way that centres yourselves. You don't get to tell people about how you always knew I was special. You don't get to rewrite history. "We won't," my mother said quietly. "Emily, we have no right to any of this, no right to your success. We were wrong, completely, fundamentally wrong, about everything." "Yes," I said. "You were." The bluntness seemed to shock them further, but I was done softening truth for their comfort. "Can we come?" Catherine asked hesitantly. "To Stockholm? I understand if you don't want us there. But Emily, I'd really like to be there, to see you get what you deserve, even if I don't deserve to witness it." I considered her request. Part of me wanted to say no, wanted to punish them with exclusion the way they'd excluded me emotionally for years. But that would have been petty. And I'd never been petty. I'd been patient, strategic, focused. "You can come," I said finally. "But understand something. I'm not doing this for you. I'm not accepting this prize to make you proud or to prove you wrong. I'm accepting it because I earned it, because my work matters, because I spent 8 years building something real and true and completely mine." They nodded, subdued, 3 people who suddenly realised they'd been living with a stranger for 32 years. A stranger who was far more than they'd ever imagined. The news broke 2 weeks before the ceremony, exactly as I'd planned. Nobel Prize winner's identity revealed. Adrienne Vale is Emily Whitmore, unknown British author. The media went absolutely insane. My face was suddenly everywhere. The quiet bookshop worker who'd been hiding in plain sight. The supposedly ordinary girl who'd been extraordinary all along. Journalists dug into my background voraciously, found my family's distinguished pedigree, found the story beneath the story. The narrative became even better. Academic dynasty's failure. Daughter wins Nobel Prize. Dismissed daughter becomes literary legend. Family underestimated her. World didn't. My family couldn't hide from it. Their colleagues called with congratulations, tinged with confused questions. Their friends wanted details. Students asked my father how it felt to have taught his daughter's work without knowing. The irony was everywhere, sharp and unavoidable and public. My mother faced particular scrutiny. A surgeon who'd spent her career diagnosing complex problems but couldn't recognise genius in her own daughter. Several articles pointed out the bitter irony. She stopped giving interviews entirely. My father had to endure conference colleagues who'd attended his presentation on my 4th novel. "You analysed your own daughter's work without knowing it was hers?" they asked, incredulous. The story spread through academic circles like wildfire. Catherine faced quieter judgment. Friends who'd heard her praise Adrienne Vale while pitying Emily now understood the full picture. The cognitive dissonance was uncomfortable for everyone who'd known our family. I gave one interview before the ceremony, carefully chosen. The journalist was known for thoughtful, nuanced reporting. We met in Edinburgh, in the same cafe where I'd written parts of my first novel. "Are you angry with your family?" she asked directly. "No," I said honestly. Anger would mean I still needed their approval. I don't. I stopped needing it the day I decided to write my first novel. The day I decided their story about me wasn't the true story. "What do you need?" she asked. "Nothing from them," I said. "Everything I needed, I created myself. That's the point. That's the whole point of this journey. I didn't wait for permission or validation or recognition. I gave those things to myself. Do you think they understand what they did wrong?" "They're beginning to," I said. "Understanding takes time. They spent decades building a narrative about me. Dismantling it won't happen overnight, but that's their work to do, not mine." The interview was published 3 days before the ceremony. It went viral immediately. The headline, "Nobel winner Emily Whitmore, I didn't wait for permission to be brilliant." My phone exploded with messages from readers, from writers, from people who'd been underestimated their entire lives. The story resonated beyond literature, beyond family dynamics. It touched something universal, the experience of being dismissed, of being told you're not enough, of proving the world wrong through quiet, persistent effort. I read every message, answered what I could, let the rest wash over me. This was bigger than my family now. This was about everyone who'd ever been called ordinary when they were extraordinary, everyone who'd been measured by the wrong tools and found lacking. This was about reclaiming your own narrative. Stockholm in December was cold and crystalline. The city dressed in early winter elegance. The ceremony hall glowed with chandeliers and history, centuries of literary achievement embedded in its walls. I wore navy silk and my grandmother's pearls, the only family heirloom I actually cherished, given to me by her before she died when I was 12. She was the only one who'd ever told me I was smart. "You see things others don't," she'd whispered to me once. "That's a gift, Emily. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I wore her pearls for her, for the one person in my family who'd seen me clearly. My family sat in the audience, dressed formally, faces carefully composed. Around them sat the genuine support system I'd built over 8 years. My publisher, who'd believed in me from the start. My agent, who'd fought for my vision. My editor, who'd helped refine my voice without trying to change it. The bookshop owner who'd encouraged my writing and given me flexible hours. Friends who knew me as both Emily and Adrienne and loved both versions equally. These were my people. The family I'd chosen. The ones who'd seen me when I was nobody and celebrated me without needing me to be somebody. The King of Sweden called my name. My real name. Emily Whitmore, writing as Adrienne Vale. I walked to the stage through applause that felt like thunder, like the sky opening, like validation made audible. I accepted the medal, heavy and warm in my hands, accepted the diploma, my name written in elegant calligraphy, accepted the moment I'd been building toward for 8 years. Then I turned to the microphone to give my acceptance speech. I'd written and rewritten it 40 times, deleted dramatic confrontations and bitter accusations, removed anything that sounded like revenge or vindication. This wasn't about settling scores. This was about truth. When I was 18, I began, my voice steady in the massive hall. Someone I loved told me I had no intellectual capacity. They meant it kindly, as far as such things can be kind. They thought they were being realistic about my limitations. They thought they were helping me adjust my expectations to match my abilities. The audience was completely silent, 2,000 people holding their breath. I believed them for approximately 48 hours. Then I decided they were wrong. Not wrong about who I was in that moment. I was struggling, I was lost, I didn't fit the educational models designed to measure intelligence. They were wrong about who I could become. I saw my father in the audience, his face unreadable. So I became someone else. I became Adrienne Vale. and through her, I became the writer I actually was. I didn't transform myself. I revealed myself. The person I'd always been was simply waiting for permission to exist, and when that permission didn't come from outside, I gave it to myself. My mother's hands were clasped tight in her lap. This prize isn't mine alone. It belongs to every person told they're not smart enough, not talented enough, not capable enough. It belongs to everyone who learns differently, thinks differently, creates differently. It belongs to the quiet ones, the underestimated ones, the ones dismissed as ordinary, who were extraordinary all along. Catherine was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it. I didn't write these books to prove anyone wrong. I wrote them because I had stories that demanded to exist, stories about erasure and identity, about memory and transformation, about the selves we hide and the selves we become. I wrote them because staying silent would have been a form of death, because I had to write or I would have disappeared entirely. I paused, looking directly at my family. To those who underestimated me, I forgive you. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because carrying your doubt would weigh down the life I've built. You were wrong about me. That's your regret to carry, not mine. I release you from my need for your approval. I release myself from your definitions. My father's eyes were wet, his distinguished composure completely shattered. And to everyone listening who feels invisible, who feels dismissed, who feels like their intelligence doesn't match the world's narrow definitions, you are not broken. The measuring tools are broken. You are not insufficient. The systems are insufficient. Your mind works exactly as it should. Your way of knowing is valid. Your voice matters. Your story deserves to be told. I held up the Nobel medal, letting the light catch its gold surface. This is proof, not that external validation should define us, but that the world's initial judgment is not the final judgment. You can rewrite the narrative. You can become the author of your own story. You can define yourself on your own terms, in your own voice, with your own vision. The applause started slowly, then built into something overwhelming. A standing ovation that lasted 6 full minutes. People were crying, not just my family, but strangers throughout the audience. I stood there holding the medal and felt something I'd never felt in my family home. Seen. Fully, completely, irrevocably seen. Not as who they wanted me to be, as who I actually was. After the ceremony, there was a formal dinner with dignitaries and royalty and literary figures from around the world. I moved through it in a daze, accepting congratulations, answering questions, existing in this surreal space between Emily and Adrienne, both and neither. My family approached carefully after I'd finished talking with the Swedish Minister of Culture. They looked smaller somehow, less certain, less composed. Your speech was beautiful, Catherine said quietly. Emily, I'm so sorry. For everything. For every moment I didn't see you. For every time I pitied you when I should have been learning from you. I know, I said, and I did. I could see the genuine remorse, the reckoning happening behind her eyes, the dismantling of every assumption she'd built about me. My mother hugged me, something she rarely did. Her arms felt awkward, uncertain. I don't know how to make this right, she whispered. I don't know if I can. You can't, I said, gently but firmly. You can't change the past. You can't undo 18 years of dismissal. You can only decide who you'll be going forward, who you'll choose to be now that you know the truth. My father stood slightly apart. This distinguished professor suddenly reduced to something raw and uncertain. "I was wrong," he said, his voice breaking. "About everything. About you, about intelligence, about what matters. I spent my career studying wisdom and completely missed it in my own home. I analysed your work in academic conferences, praised your brilliance to colleagues, never knowing I was talking about my daughter, the daughter I called dim." "Yes," I said simply. "You did." He flinched but nodded, accepting the truth without excuse. Can you forgive us?" I considered the question carefully, looking at each of them. My father with his shame, my mother with her guilt, Catherine with her grief. They were suffering. That was visible and real, but their suffering didn't erase mine. "I can forgive the ignorance," I said finally. "I can forgive that you didn't know how to see me, but I can't forget the impact. You shaped my childhood with your limitations. That's permanent. Those wounds are permanent. But I shaped my adulthood with my strength. That's permanent too, and more important." "What do we do now?" my mother asked, looking lost in a way I'd never seen her look. "Whatever you want," I said. "I don't need anything from you. I'm not asking for anything from you. If you want a relationship with me, the actual me, not the daughter you imagined or the daughter you wanted, then we can build something new, something honest. But it starts with accepting who I actually am, not who you thought I was, not who you wanted me to be, who I am." They nodded, humbled in ways I'd never seen them humbled. Catherine touched my arm hesitantly. "I read all your books 3 times each, some of them 4 times. I thought Adrienne Vale was my hero, the woman I aspired to be. I didn't realise she was my sister, the sister I'd been dismissing for years." "She wasn't," I said. "I was never trying to be your hero. I was trying to be myself. That's all I ever wanted, to be seen as myself." The months after Stockholm were strange and overwhelming. My face was everywhere, magazine covers, television interviews, newspaper profiles. The story had everything: family drama, hidden identity, underdog triumph, artistic achievement. It captured public imagination in ways I hadn't anticipated. Interview requests flooded in. Universities offered professorships and honorary doctorates. Literary festivals begged me to keynote. I accepted some, declined most. Tried to find balance between sharing my story and protecting my privacy. My family tried, genuinely tried. My father invited me to guest lecture at Cambridge, introducing me with genuine pride and visible humility. He told his students about his failure to recognise my intelligence, turned our story into a teaching moment, about cognitive bias and limited definitions of brilliance. My mother started reading fiction for the first time in her adult life, working through my entire catalogue with the same focused attention she brought to medical journals. She sent me thoughtful notes about each book, asking questions, engaging with the themes. It was awkward, but genuine. Catherine and I began meeting for coffee monthly, building a real relationship instead of the hierarchical dynamic we'd always had. She asked about my writing process, my inspiration, my journey. She listened without the old pity, without condescension. We were starting to become actual sisters, not just siblings connected by blood and obligation. But I kept my apartment in Edinburgh, kept my distance, kept my independence. Because here's what they still didn't fully understand. I didn't need their approval anymore. I'd outgrown the need for their validation the moment I decided to write my first novel. Their acceptance now was nice, was healing in small ways, but it wasn't necessary. It wasn't the point. I'd already proven everything I needed to prove, to myself. My 9th novel came out the following spring, dedicated to everyone who had to become someone else to become themselves. It sold 3 million copies in the first month, debuted at number 1 in 17 countries simultaneously. I gave more speeches, taught occasional workshops, started a foundation to support young writers from non-traditional educational backgrounds, kids who learned differently, thought differently, didn't fit conventional academic molds. I funded scholarships, writing retreats, mentorship programs, poured millions into creating opportunities for the next generation of underestimated voices, used my platform to advocate for educational reform, for multiple intelligences, for narrative learning styles, spoke at conferences about cognitive diversity, about the ways we limit human potential by insisting everyone think the same way. My family attended my events sometimes, sat in audiences and listened to me speak about creativity and perseverance and self-belief. Sometimes I caught my father watching me with this expression of wonder mixed with profound regret. My mother told a journalist that I was her greatest achievement, which made me laugh because she still didn't understand. I wasn't her achievement at all. I was my own. 5 years after Stockholm, I gave a commencement address at Edinburgh University, the city where I'd written my first novel, where I'd become Adrienne Vale, where I'd first believed I might be extraordinary. 20,000 people in attendance. My family was there, older now, softer somehow, changed by years of reckoning with their mistakes. I spoke about transformation and authenticity, about the difference between becoming someone else and becoming yourself, about how the world will try to tell you who you are, but only you get to decide if that story is true. You'll be measured by tools that don't fit, I told the graduates. You'll be judged by standards that don't apply. You'll be told you're not enough in 1,000 different ways, and you have a choice. You can believe those stories, or you can write your own. The applause was thunderous, but the moment that mattered came afterward. A young woman approached me, shaking, crying. "I'm failing out," she said. "My parents think I'm stupid. I think I'm stupid. But I heard your story and is there hope?" I took her hands, held them firmly. "There's more than hope. There's certainty. You are not stupid. You are learning who you are and how you think. That's not failure. That's discovery. That's the beginning of everything." "How did you do it?" she asked desperately. "How did you stop believing what they said?" I thought about it carefully. I didn't stop believing them overnight. I had moments of doubt for years, still do sometimes, but I made a choice. I chose to write one page, then another, then another. I chose to trust the voice inside me that said I had something to say. Small choices, repeated daily until they became a life. She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I write poetry," she whispered. "Bad poetry, probably." "All first poetry is bad," I said, smiling. Mine was terrible, embarrassingly bad, but I kept writing. That's the only secret. You keep going. You keep choosing yourself over and over until it becomes who you are. She left with something new in her posture, something like possibility, like belief. I watched her go and felt the full weight of my journey. Not pride exactly, something quieter than that. Satisfaction, maybe. The knowledge that pain transformed into purpose is never wasted, that surviving isn't enough. You have to grow, evolve, become. My father appeared beside me. "You changed that girl's life?" "Maybe," I said, "or maybe I just reminded her of something she already knew, that she's more than other people's limited vision." He was quiet for a moment. "I think about who you could have been if we'd supported you properly, if we'd seen you from the beginning." "I am who I could have been," I said firmly. "My path was harder because of your blindness. Yes, but it was also entirely mine. No one can take credit for what I built. Not even you, in retrospect. Not even in regret. He nodded slowly. I suppose that's fair. It's not about fairness, I said. It's about truth. I'm 37 now. I've written 14 novels, each one different, each one pushing boundaries, each one true. Won prizes I didn't dream existed when I started, changed lives through stories, built a career and identity completely on my own terms, in my own voice, with my own vision. My relationship with my family is cordial, sometimes warm, never quite deep. Too much history. Too many scars that won't fully heal. But we've reached a kind of peace. They respect me now. Fear me a little, perhaps. Understand that the daughter they dismissed became someone they can't categorize, can't control, can't diminish. I don't visit often, don't need to. I built my own family, writers and artists and thinkers who see me clearly, who knew me when I was nobody and love me still, who celebrate my victories and support my struggles. That's the family that matters. Sometimes I think about alternate versions of my life. What if my parents had recognized my intelligence early? What if they'd nurtured it instead of dismissing it? Would I have become Adrienne Vale? Would I have written these books? Would I have developed this particular voice, shaped by years of silence and observation? I don't know. And it doesn't matter. This is the life I have. These are the books I wrote. This is the woman I became, not despite my family's blindness, but through it. Their underestimation became my fuel. Their doubt became my motivation. Their certainty that I would fail became my determination to succeed beyond their wildest imagination. I didn't destroy them with my success. I outgrew them. That's the real victory, not the prizes or the fame or the wealth, not the Nobel or the bestsellers or the critical acclaim. The victory is that I no longer need their approval. I no longer wait for their recognition. I no longer measure my worth by their standards. I defined myself. I created myself. I became myself. And that quiet, powerful act of self-creation is worth more than every prize, every accolade, every validation the world could offer. I didn't become Adrienne Vale to prove Emily Whitmore was worthy. I became Adrienne Vale because Emily Whitmore already was worthy, and I needed a name powerful enough to carry that truth into the world without the weight of their expectations crushing it. Now, everyone knows. Now, the world sees what my family refused to see for 18 years, but their seeing doesn't change anything fundamental. I was always this person, always this capable, always this brilliant, always this determined. I just had to become someone else to show myself the truth. And then I had to become myself again to share it with the world. My victory was never revenge. My victory was becoming untouchable, not because I hardened myself against hurt, but because I built a self so strong, so certain, so thoroughly my own that their old judgments couldn't reach me anymore. They live in their regret. I live in my freedom. And every book I write, every story I tell, every life I touch through words, that's not about them anymore. That's about me. About the girl who refused to disappear. About the woman who created herself from silence and doubt and transformed it all into art that changed the world. I didn't need them to believe in me. I believed in myself. And that made all the difference. That's the story. That's the truth. I was never dim. I was never ordinary. I was never less than. I was simply waiting for my moment, building my strength in silence, preparing for the day when I would step into light so bright, so undeniable that no one could ever dismiss me again. That day came in Stockholm, but it started years earlier, in a tiny apartment in Edinburgh, when I wrote the first word of my first novel. when I gave myself permission to be extraordinary, when I chose myself.